Hello and welcome to Risk Chats with AFERM. I'm your host, Paul Marshall. Today we'll be speaking with Meredith Stein from the NIH about their risk inventory, risk champions, and their risk profile. So without further ado, here's Meredith. Good morning and welcome to the podcast. Today we have Meredith here from NIH. Good morning, Meredith.
Good morning.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us today. I wanted to start off, if you could just please give us a little overview of NIH's risk management program and your role over there.
Sure, thanks for having me. NIH has had a risk management program in place since 2009, and this was all before enterprise risk management began taking a stronger hold in the federal government. Our program establishes a framework and standard methodology that's used across NIH to identify, assess, and manage risk. But to give you some background first about what NIH is, NIH is the nation's medical research agency, and it supports scientific studies that turn discovery into health. And our mission is to seek and apply knowledge to enhance health, lengthen life, and reduce illness and disability. We have a fairly healthy budget of $32 billion annually, and we invest that in more than 80% of our funding is awarded through grants. And we also conduct research within the largest clinical research hospital in the world. We have about 6,000 scientists in our own labs that conduct research on our campus in Bethesda, Maryland. We're a very decentralized organization with about 28 component units, and 27 of which are individual institutes and centers that are focused on either a particular body part or a type of disease. And each institute and center has a specific research agenda and a separate budget allocated directly by Congress. And the remaining component unit is the Office of the Director, which is the central office for setting policy planning and coordinating, and oversight program activities for the 27 institutes and centers. My office is the Office of Management Assessment, and that's part of the Office of the Director. So we set the policy and guidance for the risk management program that's used across NIH. My office reports to the NIH CFO, and I have a small team of dedicated staff to support the risk management program. We spent a large part of our time communicating and educating people about risk management, and of course, more recently on enterprise risk management. And we're experiencing, I think, a new challenge right now of educating people to understand the difference between enterprise level risks and the more day-to-day operational level risks.
Right. So with an organization I guess it's decentralized basically, 27 institutes. I mean, sounds like that's probably the biggest challenge for you all to get the message out to everybody and everybody, getting on board with the program.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Well, actually, that brings us to my first question about how did you guys, put together a risk inventory with that, everything so spread out like that, and what was your approach?
Thank you. So the risk management program methodology is a 6-stage approach, and it includes an annual risk inventory assessment process. And our program offers a lot of flexibility for each of the NIH organizations to conduct their annual assessment the way they'd like.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, they have to have a documented risk inventory that meets our program requirements. And we're right now in the middle of that cycle. The risk inventory is due at the end of August. And then after that information is collected, my team aggregates all of it and looks across all of the risk inventories to see if there are any sort of common themes, recurring emerging risks, or new types of things that might float to the top that might be better addressed at the NIH level.
Right.
And my team produces reports that aggregate risks from across the inventories by category, so things like HR, acquisition, IT security, facilities, and we provide those reports to the policy officials that are in charge of that program area, so they could look and see what is coming up from I guess we can look at this from a bottom-up approach about what the institutes and centers are saying at their level that they think are challenging to their mission of their own organization. And the risk inventories are a great source of information for us to help NIH develop our first ever ERM risk profile, and that those recurring annual risk inventory updates will also contribute to any refreshes that we will do for the ERM risk profile. And again, we see this as like a bottom-up, top-down approach to identifying enterprise risks. And the risk inventories also help us focus on areas that senior leadership might request a more in-depth and agency-wide look at an internal control assessment. And my team will conduct those to give the NIH director some assurances that those internal controls are operating as intended.
Right. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, and again, but I'm still going back to, so, how do you get folks across these different areas to really be on board? I mean, do you have something, I think you said something about champions when I talked to you before out in the regions, or?
Yes, great question. So I have 4 FTEs supporting the risk management program, and with each NIH organization or component, we designed a network of risk management champions and risk management officers to oversee the execution of the risk management program at their organization. Right. And so each of my FTEs has a group of organizations that they function as a liaison for. And they can engage the champions at those institutes and centers to, if they have any questions or need some feedback or simply just want to toss an idea around about risk management in NIH. That said, everyone is always welcome to contact any member of my team, and we take every opportunity to make sure that the champions and officers know that we're customer service focused and here to support them in their execution of risk management at NIH. A few years ago, we initiated a risk management champion working group to give the champions a venue to share ideas and best practices. The ultimate goal was to pass the ownership on to the champions for that group themselves. So we're extremely proud that sort of played out the way we had hoped. In addition to the quarterly meetings that these champions conduct, the last 2 years, this champion working group sponsored and managed a risk culture day for the risk community, which was an excellent, you could sort of think of it as a mini AFERM summit.
Oh, right, yeah.
We do a one-day event at NIH. It features a variety of educational presentations and speakers. And the theme that we've done for the last 2 years, the topics that we've tried to talk about and enhance skill sets have been facilitation, because that's where we see a lot of the skill sets for risk practitioners needing to facilitate conversations about risks.
Right. And I'm just curious, who makes up the champions, or what type of roles or what types of folks are the champions?
Most of them have been management analysts, the 343 series.
Okay.
That's been the bulk of the job series that we've seen.
And do they have specific, do you give them guidance at the beginning, this is what your role is going to be and what we would like you to do, or?
Yes, the risk management program has a policy that describes the roles and responsibilities under the risk management program for NIH, and then we have a supporting guidebook that goes into more in depth what those roles and responsibilities mean.
Okay, so that sounds obviously essential. You're setting up these programs. Here's the rules, here's the policies, here's the guidance, here's some procedures. Otherwise, folks aren't going to know what to do or what they're supposed to do. And I love this champion idea. I think other agencies would really benefit from something like this. And actually, did you guys just come up with that, or had you heard that work somewhere else?
At the start of our implementation back in 2008 and 2009, we recognized that there was a need to have that champion role, that with the program sitting in the office of the director level, we needed those special people and with those right skill sets that knew their own organization and business and culture.
Right.
And so that was the key to the success of implementation for NIH.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, more about learning. I'm curious to hear about what kind of learning initiatives and how you spread the word out there on the program.
Sure. So that getting back a little bit to the champion working group, it's been a fabulous resource for the champions who are new to their positions. A while back, we realized that as time advances and people move on to other responsibilities, we'd naturally be faced with a new cadre of people trying to fill that champion role. And we've, over the last 2 years, been able to take time to create on-demand e-learning. And we haven't been able to have that effort take place until 2 years ago. And we're fortunate to have a resource that is skilled set in e-learning, and we're happily engaging head-on that activity at the moment. We developed and deployed basic courses that introduce enterprise risk management, more descriptions about the risk management program itself, our methodology, and especially the terminology, and making sure that everybody understood sort of that lexicon,
Right.
that we're all on the same page with that. And not just to the champions in the community, but to a wide variety of individuals. And right now we're focusing on developing more advanced courses that break down the individual stages of our 6-step methodology for those who fill the role of the risk management champion. And we're planning to pair these advanced courses with a lab experience so the champions can get more hands-on learning and a variety of practical approaches to help them execute the risk management program within their own organization. And our plan right now is to roll that out with our first advanced course and learning lab early next year. One thing I'd like to mention is that we also have an available on-demand e-training to teach people how to use our homegrown software application for capturing the annual risk data.
Oh, okay. So, all right. So can you describe that software a little bit, how that works? I mean,
Sure. So when we first began our program, we used Excel templates. And then we moved on to an off-the-shelf GRC product. We eventually came to the decision to develop our own centralized in-house application to capture the risk inventory data across NIH. This will actually be the second year the application's in use for the annual risk inventory assessment, and we're always seeking feedback, the ways to enhance the user experience. We find it very beneficial to, throughout the system development process, to actively engage with our champions as end users to produce a system that met the various needs and flexibility for those folks. I'll give you an example. So some of our organizations prefer to have the risk champion input all of the data into the system, while others prefer to have managers assigned to each risk input their own data. And this is one of the flexibilities our program allows. We wanted to ensure that the application would support that flexibility.
right.
We've also spent a lot of time in discussions with the champions on the types of reports that their organization needs and their leadership needs to help make decisions based on risk information. And two types of reports that I wanted to share. One was we actually have a report that collects and produces a report for the risk inventory, so showing the risk statement, the risk score, the risk owner. And another terrific report that we've found to be helpful is a trend risk report. So looking at the scores throughout the course of 5 years, see if there are any significant changes. Even if a risk manager applies risk responses, doesn't necessarily mean that the score might decrease, but that we can look at and see if there are any trends across the 5 years, if the risk exists for that long, to see what the trend information is.
Right. So, and you have been doing those analyses and finding trends, I'm assuming.
Yes, it's been helpful to see, looking at all of the risk inventories and taking that enterprise approach to see if there are any sort of common themes, frequently identified risks, things that, from a risk event might have happened that have trickled down to the institute and center level.
Right. So just a little bit more on that software. So is it the folks that use, I guess, the different institutes, so that they would just see their risks and then they kind of move up higher levels, so you can see everything, or what's the access?
Correct. So the access is locked down to their own organization, and then my team has access to all of the risk data, and my team aggregates and analyzes that information, tries to synthesize it, and we put together a presentation to show to the risk community the frequently scored and that type of analysis with some graphs, how the, I guess, bell curve of all of the risk inventories came out as red, yellow, or green. What's the most of the number of risks that have been identified this year. We also compare it to the prior year data, and we tried to keep it anonymous in the sense that we don't share specifics about individual risk inventories, but we look at it, from an aggregate level.
Right. And this is just something on top of my head, but have you seen since you've been doing this for a few years, I mean, do you see the risks, getting better, or as far as, you getting better responses from folks, or they're really getting deeper into potential risks, or, do you see things kind of getting,
Sure. So over the years, we have seen improvements in the data quality, and we've placed an emphasis on that in our annual risk inventory guidance. things, and provided tools and templates like a checklist of these are the types of information, and trying to hone in on a better quality of data. We've also looked at those trends to see if there are any emerging risks that have occurred throughout the year, and whether as compared to prior years, if anything is significant enough to report to leadership that they would need to know.
Right. That's good. Well, so I know recently agencies had to submit their risk profiles. So I'm assuming you guys did that. You had your first risk profile come up. How did that go?
Yes. So as I mentioned, NIH has had a risk management program in place since 2009, but OMB's 2016 update to Circular A123 was the impetus to think about risk from an enterprise perspective.
Right.
The timing was perfect because NIH had recently developed an NIH-wide strategic plan. And in that plan, the director emphasized the importance of engaging in proactive risk management practices. We understood that the requirement in OMB Circular A123 was for an ERM risk profile directed towards the executive level agencies, and for that meant for us the Department of Health and Human Services. NIH felt we were well situated to undertake that challenge. We had a couple of goals in mind when we began the effort to develop our first profile. I strongly believe that having the dialogue about risk is one of the benefits of ERM, and the strategic plan was fairly new to the organization. We anticipated the effort of developing our profile would engage a more open and candid conversation about the challenges that threaten the achievement of the goals set out in the NIH-wide strategic plan. It would also offer a chance to discuss the opportunities that could significantly enhance our ability to support the NIH mission. Our profile was designed to be an internal informational management tool, and we leveraged diverse risk assessment data to articulate thinking on NIH level risks. Our goal was to have the data to be used to inform strategic planning, budget formulation, budget execution, performance management, resource allocation, and other high-level decisions. The process we use would probably sound very familiar to the people with experience in developing risk profiles. My team performed an environmental scan of our agency and coupled that with information from existing risk data. We collected and analyzed an array of available information, existing inventories, assessments, internal and external reports, meeting minutes, news articles, budget requests, congressional testimonies, and the NIH directors' blogs. Then my team analyzed the information using the NIH strategic plan as a framework and proposed a number of risks for leadership to consider as potential NIH ERM risks. Then leadership selected 10 risks for the initial profile and designated and tapped a risk owner for each. My team then worked with each risk owner to fine-tune the statements and capture supporting data for that particular risk, and we helped the risk managers and risk owners document planned action items. We didn't assign scores or priority rankings. We put the profile together, and it was reviewed and approved by senior management.
Okay.
We did encounter a few challenges. ERM was new, and we were working with many people who had no idea what ERM meant and what the profile was and why we were creating one. And so we had a lot of educational discussions that had to happen before we could even get down to the business of discussing the ERM risk statements. Another challenge is one commonly faced by any effort that engages with leadership is getting time on their busy schedules.
Right.
But because ERM's about those top-level risks, senior leadership engagement's an absolute must. We know that having an initial profile is the starting point. My team and I are continuously looking for ways to mature our program. We're communicating the results of the profile, and without a doubt, it was very satisfying to facilitate and hear those cross-cutting dialogues that occurred during the selection of the ERM risks. The word needs to go out beyond the small circle of folks who we've actively engaged with in the development of the profile. And as I mentioned earlier, NIH is a decentralized organization, and there are many different groups that would benefit from knowing about the profile. We'll be working on communications and presentations for some time. But right now, we're, like I said, also in the middle of our annual risk inventory assessment. This year, we're able to offer the profile as another source of information for organizations to consider as they determine their own level of ERM risks. But as our program matures, we're thinking about how to best use and integrate it into existing decision processes. I talked a little bit earlier about our efforts to develop on-demand risk management on e-learning at multiple levels, and we're proud of our progress. We'll be looking on how to incorporate information about the profile into our training.
Okay. Well, and so these, when you came up with the profile, and then even for all the risks that you've all been tracking, how do you monitor progress on these things and make sure people are really, don't just put it down on paper and then forget about it. They're actually doing something actively.
Yeah, that is also a challenge. That there's the accountability factor.
Right.
That it's not just a shelf filler. That you actually have to use that information to help make decisions. We're looking for ways on how to get the risk responses updated, see what progress has been made for those action plans that were documented a couple of months ago, and seeing the progress that's been made in discussions with those risk owners.
Right, and you mentioned obviously this helps with strategy and budget and everything. So, is senior leadership at this point, regularly incorporating the ERM risks into their discussions, or is that kind of a work in progress, so to speak?
We've seen success stories with the risk data being used to help make budget decisions.
Oh, good.
That there are examples where an organization uses their risk inventory information to make a budget request for additional funds, and leveraging that risk information to say in two ways. One, if you don't fund this effort or this risk event or risk response, then the risk is either high, medium, or low. If you the opportunity is here, if you do provide me this funding, this is how the money will be spent as a risk response.
Right. Okay. Well, that makes sense. I mean, that's what we're striving to do here, to use this data for making decisions.
Exactly.
Obviously. Well, and actually, I was curious too. To what degree does your team get involved in actual risk responses? Do you guys advise on that, or what was your role in that?
So, as typical with most risk management programs, my team as risk practitioners are not responsible to identify the risks or even develop or execute risk responses.
Right.
Each risk has a designated risk manager accountable for that. That said, my team has experience in risk mitigation techniques and are available for facilitation and consultation as a strategic advisor. We get the right people in the room to discuss the risk and the risk responses, but at the end of the day, it's the risk manager's responsibility.
Absolutely, but yeah, you definitely help facilitate those discussions, or at least get folks in the room.
Yes, that's one of the core competencies that I see as a person who works in the risk field, is that as a practitioner, you need to be able to facilitate those conversations, ask the question why multiple times to understand the root cause of a risk, and also what seems to be happening is that sometimes this is the first time that you're getting people from different, parts of the organization, so chopping down those silos, getting people in the room that have not typically sat together to discuss different perspectives of a risk.
Right. Well, let me ask, so this kind of goes to my next question. I was curious what the interaction is between NIH and HHS level, right? Because they also have a risk program or risk guidance. So what is that dynamic like?
So ERM can exist and operate at multiple levels at the same time, and this definitely applies to the relationship between HHS and NIH. The NIH CFO is a member of the governance body at the HHS level called the ERM Council, and NIH level information flows up as an input to the HHS ERM profile. HHS looks at cross-cutting risks that affect other operating divisions under HHS, and leadership discusses the risks that are sort of trans HHS, like acquisitions, HR, IT, security, shared services. At the risk practitioner level, I'm a member of the HHS ERM core team, as well as my counterparts at the HHS operating divisions, our sister agencies such as CDC, FDA, and CMS. I think HHS has a very healthy and logical maturity model approach to implementing ERM across HHS. HHS provides tools and templates to guide a flexible approach towards ERM, and I very much enjoy working with the HHS practitioners there. When we were developing the NIH ERM profile, we leveraged as a source of information the HHS profile to validate and confirm the NIH level information. Indirectly, the NIH strategic plan is linked to the HHS strategic plan and those goals in which NIH plays a part, and the selection of the NIH ERM risks were framed by the NIH strategic plan.
Right. Well, that makes sense. Yeah, because I just find it baffling. The organization is so huge. How do you bring it down to a small number of highest profile risks? And I don't know if you know the answer to this, but again, when NIH and FDA and everybody else kind of sends their risks to the higher level, do you have any idea how they kind of get that winnowed down to a high profile list?
It's all about the dialogue. They are very thoughtful in coming together monthly to talk, and also when in between the monthly meetings, they're having discussions and looking at information. Each of the members of the HHS ERM Council looks at the types of risks that are proposed for management and HHS to consider in the ERM profile, and they leverage technology to help narrow the gap of which risks need more dialogue. You might have IT security, right? Certainly in any organization, whether it's public or private, IT security is going to come up as a top level enterprise risk.
Right.
So there might be conversations that need a little less dialogue, that this is undisputable a risk for the agency. And then those that need more dialogue, they're very thoughtful and deliberate about how those risks are discussed and how that information is synthesized. Certainly there's a lot of effort that goes into supporting those meetings by the HHS practitioners there.
Right. Okay. Well, and then NIH itself is so big too, right? So you have the champions to help you at the different institutes, and you really have to have this huge community participating to make this work.
Yes,
right?
It can't just be one individual. Certainly, without the champions at the NIH, we would not have a program at all. It's definitely they know their own organization. They're very thoughtful in understanding how their leadership needs the risk data information, and how and at what level each organization and each institute or center director has their own data needs. So there is variation, but they're the ones who know the folks who are the risk managers of those risks that their organization identifies as enterprise, and they definitely play a very key role.
Right. Well, Meredith, this was fascinating. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today, and thanks again. I look forward to hearing more about your program in the future.
My pleasure. Thanks for hosting.
That's our show. Thanks for joining us. Check us out on AFERM.org, where you see all the podcasts. Give us some feedback. Let us know what you'd like to hear. Any guests or topics you'd be interested in. And until next time, this is Paul Marshall signing out for Risk Chats with AFERM.